Hello, climbers, and welcome to Season 3 of Climbing Mount CMMC. Hello, climbers, and welcome back to another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC, the podcast. My name is Kaleigh Floyd, and this is Bobby Guerra, and today we are going to be talking about inheritance. We're very excited to talk about this topic, but before we dive into the definition of inheritance, I think it's very important to start a little bit backwards with something first, which is an ESP's involvement with an organization seeking assessment, just in general. I would love to discuss, when you bring an external service provider onto the scene. So let's say you're an organization seeking assessment and you have an external company that is doing IT services or some type of service for you that would consist on one of the assessment objectives or controls from NIST 800-171. That person gets pulled in a way that you should understand. And 32 CFR does speak very clearly to this statement. And we're going to be talking specifically about level 2 certification assessments here, okay? Because that's going to be probably the most common type of assessment that people are going to need. Very rarely do people need a level 3 assessment. Right. And I think level 1 is not going to be on as much stuff. No. They're probably going to slap on level 2.
They don't even have a cap for that.
They can, yeah. So let's talk about this. In 32 CFR final rule, it says level 2 certification assessments with the use of an external service provider, an ESP, not a CSP. An OSA may use an external service provider that is not a CSP to process, store, or transmit CUI in performance of a contract or subcontract with the requirement for the CMMC status of level 2 under the following circumstances. Now it's going to list a few circumstances, so let's just go through those. The use of the ESP, its relationship to the OSA, and the services provided are documented in the OSA's SSP, System Security Plan, and described in the ESP's service description, very, very important as an external service provider, and the customer responsibility matrix. This one is very, very important. An external service provider, which I explained previously, is somebody who's
MSPs,
yes, like an MSP, somebody that is you outsource, a certain type of IT service or whatnot to them. Then there's the organization itself seeking assessment. They call it an OSA because they are the person that is actually going to be assessed, right? Then there is their system security plan. This is the foundation that you build upon that talks to NIST 800-171 requirements, which are 110 controls and 320 assessment objectives. All of those should be broken out and understood in a system security plan. But in this statement, it says when an external service provider is included in your environment, you also have to include them in your system security plan. And what that means is if there is a control, we love to use the very first control with the AC family access control because 3.1.1 is actually talking about a few different things with access. And there's A, B, C, D, and E. Is there F?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's F. 6 assessment objectives that are in that AC control. And there's some that will speak to the organization seeking assessment. So, for example, they hire an employee, right? They hire a user and tell them that they're going to be inside their system. An MSP, or the external service provider, does not hire people for your organization, right? So they can't do that thing, okay? But once it gets down to, assessment objective, maybe C or D is when it switches. There's a difference between identifying the user who is going to be inside of the system. A MSP does not identify that person. They don't hire them. They don't do the background check on that employee of that organization. No, but they will allow and add them into the system. meaning, logically, let's say it's a Microsoft GCC High container, they will add the license, right, for the organization seeking assessment into the container and add that user into the container. They do the technical part of it, right? So you already see just in the AC control 3.1.1, you already see the broken out responsibilities here of the parties when you add an external service provider. This can be so beneficial. And I mean, obviously we believe in external service providers because we are one, but
Right.
like there are many companies that don't have the time or the opportunity or the effort or the money and resources to do this stuff on their own. They can't do
Right.
all of these things,
So
right?
in alpha is authorized users are identified, and then delta system access is limited to
Mm-hmm.
authorized users. So you are authorizing them, and now you've got a limit based on what you just
Mm-hmm.
authorized.
Exactly.
So it's the company getting assessed that authorizes them. They say, all right, Axiom, it's your job to make sure that these 10 people
Yep.
are the only people that are able to get in the system. We got it. And then we got to create conditional access. We've got to make sure MFA is going. Like there's all these types of things that we have to put in place to identify that. And you're wanting to talk about inheritance, but there's also that key component, like you're talking about responsibility, right? So who's responsible for what? And then you can start talking about who's going to inherit what, because you got to know who's supposed to be responsible for that. For us, Delta, Echo, and Foxtrot, so the last three of those 6 assessment objectives fall to us as the MSP having to do.
Yep.
Now the question is, what's inheritable, right? What can the auditor then turn? They go, okay, Jill's lug nuts, you're making highly classified lug nuts that you're going to put on a, YF whatever. And those are special. So, you're going to have to authorize users into the system where you store all of the schematics and all that fun stuff that you're going to do to build that. So they're going to have to talk about how they authorize the processes that are going to be allowed to run on those systems and the devices that are allowed to do that. So they're going to have to speak about that. Mm-hmm. And then they're going to turn to us and they're going to go, Axiom, how are you going to do that? Like, how are you going to make that happen? And is any part of that inheritable? What is the wonderfulness about inheritance if you're able to capitalize on it?
Yes. Okay. So the reason why I explained the first part of the 32 CFR final rule and what it says about ESPs in an organization seeking assessments environment is because exactly what Bobby said, that there is a difference between accountability in something and being in charge of the environment itself and being accountable for what happens in the environment versus inheriting something from another organization. And the inheritance is basically how I can describe that is instead of in an assessment, somebody getting assessed for a certain assessment objective or a control, like how they would regularly get assessed, they would inherit from the external service provider that has already been assessed by a CMMC level 2 assessment and has already gone through that controls assessment. They would inherit that, that assessment of that control basically, and wouldn't get assessed as much as they would if it was a brand new assessment without that external service provider. So you're basically inheriting a piece of your ESP's CMMC level 2 assessment. So what does that mean? Well, that means that they have to have the certification to even be viable to do that, because they can't just be, oh yeah, I'm CMMC level 2. They can't just come up and say that to an assessor and then we're like, oh, okay, cool, then they'll inherit that. No. They're going to go in to see your CMMC status, and they're going to verify that you're actually certified. You can't just say that you're up to code with CMMC level 2.
You got to make sure you have one of these.
Oh, right. Thank you. There, it's in the
There's our
background.
certification right there.
And
Hung on my
so
wall.
I want to speak very clearly about what the CAP, the CMMC assessment process, says about inheritance, because I think it will explain to some people that are listening to this why there's a lot of tension about this subject. And so let's go to the CAP.
Before we do, I think it's also important to say that there is another option here, which is FedRAMP, which we're not talking about that, which
FedRAMP.
FedRAMP if you have a FedRAMP solution, right? So for example, you're using GCC High from Microsoft. They have a FedRAMP accreditation. They're authorized in the FedRAMP marketplace. So you can inherit certain things from them.
Yeah,
And
they're a
Pat,
CSP, a cloud
right,
service
they're a
provider.
cloud product, and we use GCC High or GCC for our clients that are in that environment. And so because they're FedRAMP and they're marked in there, and we have the package when our clients get assessed, we give that to the auditor and we say, hey, look, the physical facilities for all of Azure's environment, we're going to inherit their FedRAMP. So we don't have to go to Microsoft to go assess their physical environment. We're going to inherit that because they got accredited through the FedRAMP process. So you get to inherit some of that, but that's not what we're talking about. No. We're talking about, and a lot of MSPs were like, and us included, as we went through and got our level 2, like as we're coming in for a landing to get assessed, we did not know how the DoD and the Cyber AB were going to handle inheritance. And at the very kind of end of the 32 CFR, they kind of said, as it came in, they're like, okay, it's not as much as you ever really thought. You're not going to be able to inherit much from it. But they did hint that there is some that can be. And this is part of what the interesting part of this conversation is all about.
So let's read this. Okay, and for those of you who don't know what the CMMC assessment process is, this is very important. This is what assessors are going to follow. This and the assessment guide for CMMC level 2 certifications. They're going to follow these things, by the book, and they should if they're a good assessor in their assessment. And so this is what they're basing their assessments off of. So this is very helpful for you to read if you're an external service provider or an organization seeking assessment. You should definitely read these things because this is how you're going to get assessed by an assessor, right? So let's talk about this. When an assessor employs the interview method to validate a security requirement on the CRM, Customer Responsibility Matrix, we referenced that before in 32 CFR Final Rule. You have to have the Customer Responsibility Matrix from who? The external service provider, not you, not the organization seeking assessment, from the external service provider themselves. Okay, so let's say that again. When an assessor employs the interview method to validate a security requirement on the CRM that is assigned to the ESP respondent must demonstrate sufficient knowledge and credible ownership of that requirement. No different than that which is required for an OSC representing a security requirement under its own responsibility. The assessment team should also employ the examine and test methods when evaluating the inheritance claims made in the CRM by the OSC. In the event the OSC is utilizing an ESP that voluntarily attained a level 2 or level 3 certification of CMMC status, the assessment team should participate and accept a lower level of effort on behalf of the ESP during the organization seeking assessment. Specifically, if the assessment team confirms the ESP is in possession of a valid certification of CMMC status, right there behind it may consider those security requirements under the responsibility of the ESP to be in validated state. Whoa.
Oof.
Whoa.
That was a lot.
That is a lot. But, what it's talking about there is what you get when having an external service provider who is CMMC level 2 certified. But let us be clear. You cannot inherit everything. You cannot just have a freebie pass, okay? I do think it is very important to understand the examine and test methods versus the interview methods. It breaks down each one of those things. The examine and test is where inheritance comes in.
Right.
And you do have the option as an assessment team to dig deeper. That's your responsibility to dig if you feel like it is needed. But it should be a little bit less of an effort to have to dig and to have to do stuff if that ESP, that external service provider, is a CMMC level 2 certified ESP. It does not say that the ESP doesn't have to be present. Actually, it says the opposite.
Yeah, the opposite.
Look at the end. ESP personnel still need to participate during phase 2 of the OSC's assessment to answer questions of the assessment team. So There's a lot of controversy specifically on talking about what you can inherit, meaning if the ESP was assessed by their environment themselves and how they handle controls and assessment objectives inside of their environment, well, was this new environment actually fully assessed with those controls and assessment objectives? And how much of those same assessment objectives and evidence and ways that you handle those things can be inherited to that new brand new organization or brand new environment, because it is a new environment. It's not the same environment that was once reviewed or what's assessed in the ESP's assessment for CMMC level 2, right?
Yeah, that's a lot to think about, because okay, so let's get super specific for MSPs, right? So let's get down to the rubber meeting the road. And what I mean by that is an MSP like us that gets assessed by level 2 is going to have a scope, an environment that they're going to get assessed. First and foremost, that environment, in my heart of hearts, needs to be an environment that supports the client.
Yes.
Hard stop there, right? Because if not, I feel like you're being disingenuous and you're straight out lying. Because if you create some like Dropbox and enterprise environment, and you have this like small little like bathroom closet that is the only thing that's really in scope, and you never go in there, and that's not how you support your clients out of, you basically just created something to get a piece of paper so that you can advertise that you got level 2, and that's not how you guys actually operate.
Say it louder for the fakers in the back.
Yeah, like, dude, you are freaking lying. Like, you can't do that. So if you're picking an MSP, make sure that you ask them, like, what did you have in scope, with your level 2 audit? Like, make sure that when you're talking with them, that how they're supporting you is out of that environment that they got scoped. Because here's the kicker, because if you're going to do inheritance at all, which what Kaleigh just read hinted that there's some possibilities of those things happening, you have no chance of that happening if the environment they're supporting you out is not the environment that got assessed.
Yeah, no.
And in the audit for that client, when they go to get audited, they're going to have to, the MSP is going to have to present their SSP and the matrix and talk about that. So they go to give that to them, and then when the client goes to get audited, they're going to want to see how that MSP did their scoping, and they want to understand that so that they can make sure that if we're going to allow any type of inheritance from what your MSP that got level 2, is that possible? Yeah. Now, what is on the table for possibilities? Now, I'm not sure if I'm jumping ahead about when you want to talk about that.
That's exactly where I'm going next, so you go right there.
Okay, so what are things that you could inherit from your MSP? It's not as many as we would like. I know a lot of good friends in the industry that we all had hoped that they would be more generous to us MSPs that took this very seriously and got assessed. Yeah. Right? And they gave us no quarters. They really did not. They were not friendly with us, allowing us to do this. I think the DoD is terrified that MSPs are going to frick this up. Yeah. And I think that they are trying to be very conservative in what they allow us to do, because they feel, and I don't know if I could argue against them, that MSPs are a bit of a dumpster fire as far as in how we have our processes matured and how we support our clients. As an MSP for over 20 plus years, I can say that's probably not too far from the truth. A lot of MSPs were really good at securing and putting processes in place for security and wrapping it with tools and other things. But when it comes to having a mature validation process and procedure and policy, MSPs are terrible at that. We're not really great at building a system that has that mechanism built into it. We'll do patching for you, but we won't have a validation process to make sure it's all happening correctly. And if it doesn't, identify that and alert. They're just terrible at that. Yeah. And so they know that. The DoD knows that. So they're less inclined to give us a pass on that. So again, this is all this goes down to theory, because they've hinted that it's possible because you have your level 2 that you can have it, but they gave us no guidance on what that really truly looks like. So what we're about to discuss is Bobby and Kaleigh's opinion on theory about how this can go. But that is all it is. Yeah. Really what it comes down to is the MSP that's working with the company they're supporting, and when they go marching into their assessment, they better darn well have already had a discussion with their C3PO about how this can go. Yeah. And what we have done is we decided we're going to assume they're going to inherit nothing, but we hope that they'll inherit some of it, but we're prepared for whatever. I think that is the appropriate approach that MSPs should always take. But I think there's going to be equilibrium that will start to be established between most of the well-respected and well-organized and mature C3POs out there. They're going to start finding equilibrium, and I think MSPs that are also dealing with those are going to find that. And I think you're going to start to have that. Here's some areas where I feel it is possible. All right. Now, if you listen to the town hall, they talked about how the Cyber AB's town hall, that in general, if that MSP hasn't ever had an audit themselves, it's almost like 2 assessments to some extent, because they don't know how has the MSP that's going to remote into them, right? Are they going to have access to CUI? Well, of course they are. That MSP that's going to be remoting into that client, like if they can't open a document, is that document going to have CUI? It could. Right? Yeah. So are they authorized to see that? Have they had training? Have they gone through a background check? But if the MSP got audited and they went through a level 2, all of that had to have happened. Yeah. Right? So all of their staff, and this is where it goes back to making sure that MSP, what they had audited is what supports the client, which includes the people. The people are part of the assets, each user, right? So when they come in, any of our staff that comes in has to go through all the training, the background checks, and all that stuff before they get access to even our GCC high tenant. And then that is the people that are authorized to then support our clients. Mm-hmm. Because we want to leverage that inheritance piece for our clients. We want to do them a solid if we can help that. Yeah. So that's an area where they can have inheritance, but it doesn't save the OSC specifically from them having to talk about their processes, but it does save the MSP talking about theirs. Right. So that's saving you from part of an assessment that is going to happen to the MSP.
Right.
All right.
Which would double your time.
Yes.
Basically, if that MSP had not already gone through that assessment before.
Bingo.
So and that's critical.
And so what I have talked with some of the more major C3Os in the organization, they found that if you have an MSP that has not got level 2, they actually started charging more money. Mm-hmm. Because they know that the assessment is going to take longer because of that. And so because of that, it's cost them more. Mm-hmm. So part of the inheritance piece isn't necessarily that you get to inherit the organization be assessed, but that you get to inherit from their level 2 and thus saving yourself from an extended extra verification process. Mm-hmm. So first, that is absolutely true and you get that benefit. Yeah. All right. But that doesn't cover all 320 for the client. That's just additional 320 that might go to the MSP that they're going to have to check on stuff.
Yeah, it's so true.
Right. So
it's basically giving you a little bit more of a pass to not screw over your client, but the client still can screw themselves over in certain ways. But at least you as an MSP came very, very prepared, as prepared as you possibly could,
To go to football, which is not theater references, which is more Kaleigh's area of expertise. It's the quarterback not throwing a touchdown. It's the quarterback not fumbling. Okay. So the MSP didn't fumble. Okay. Yeah. Now we go into their assessment, the OSC being assessed. This is where they're on the offensive trying to figure out how they can work with the client to help them pass. Mm-hmm. So now let's talk about how the MSP can actually provide inheritance for them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's say that you have a system, and this is theory. We're going to go theory. Let's say that you have an application allow listing program or a vulnerability examination system, right? So you're looking at the system's vulnerabilities and capabilities. Let's say that system is housed by the MSP.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. And that system got thoroughly assessed and the processes around it by the level 2 assessment. And that system talks to the organization getting assessed the same way that it talked to the MSP that they had scanning their stuff, because you're housing that and you're doing that as part of the MSP. Now, some people would say, wait a minute, that means you're a CSP. No, it doesn't, because the fact is it is a one-to-one relational engagement between you and that organization.
Yeah, you're not selling by credit card on a website.
You're not selling that by credit card. It is an absolute intimate connection between you and that client. So chill out. We're not talking about CSPs.
Yeah, leave us alone.
Yeah, simmer down. So that's not what we're talking about. So in that situation, in theory, because it is the same system that was validated, that was assessed, it is basically infrastructure that's being provided by the MSP to that client. In my opinion, that those systems could potentially be inherited. Is it a guarantee? No.
No, because I've talked to CCAs that are like, but it's still happening in a different environment, so we have to confirm that it is happening. But here's my thing is, even though they have to confirm that that's happening, they still are able to know the exact process from your assessment. So I still think that that saves a critical amount of time. And I don't think that
does.
would be understated.
Understated. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And this is where the MSP is probably going to start partnering. And I use that word not in a collusive term. Again, they're probably going to be partnering with other C3POs that have already seen their environments.
Yeah.
Right. And they're going to work with them. And they're like, remember, you just assessed this same system that pushes an agent, right, to that client, and it's doing those same activities. There's a danger there that things aren't going to be appropriately examined. That's up to the level of comfort for the C3PO to walk that line with the MSP and their reputation and how they got their level 2. All right. So that's infrastructure provided. So that is infrastructure that the MSP is providing to that client. But the MSP also will do services. Maybe the MSP might stand up that organization's Sentinel, their SIM tool, and their tenant, and they manage it. Okay. They might stand it up the same way that they manage theirs, but it's not the MSPs. They didn't build the infrastructure. They're just possibly duplicating it or providing that to them. So really it's just a service play here. So they're providing that service play to that organization. I don't see a way that they could inherit that.
We have talked it in so many different paths and ways and discussions with CCAs, and they're still like, and I need to see this.
I still need to see it.
And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, you.
Right.
And I understand, I get it. And this is something that I feel so passionately about with NIST 853, special publication 853. And I think that Corinne, I'm going to link the video that Corinne recently just did below. She did a beautiful job explaining how well the FedRAMP system does this type of inheritance and the way that you actually have to get your environment where you service people out of assessed in a certain way because you're servicing people, from that environment in that way.
And that's sort of what I was hinting about the infrastructure provided is sort of in kind to the FedRAMP process, but it's not the same thing. But it's leaning on those same principles is the reason why I feel like it's adjacent. Let's just put it that way.
FedRAMP adjacent.
That you can try to argue or do that, but services provided. This is where some theory has come out to where, and this is just me provided, but I think a lot of MSPs that have gone down the level 2 are starting to talk amongst themselves and are trying to think about talking with the cyber ABs with the DoD about like could there be an additional an assessment and enhancement requirement to MSPs where they could look at the processes that we have and validate those and say, okay, let's validate how the MSP operates, how they're going to do the process of setting up the client sentinel or how they're going to do whatever. And they go through some type of validation process to, and I would go through gladly an additional requirements. And if I can then get
person, I think you would.
yeah, but if that means then I'm able to validate my processes so my clients can now get inheritance.
Yes.
Because our processes have been validated and those are what we use for the client, then you can say, okay, well, all of these controls are following the processes we built, therefore they can be inherited from us. And now, this is where you use the matrix like you're talking about, and you say, okay, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, those are the clients, so they don't get a pass on that. The client's got to talk about how they do their background checks. The client's got to talk about, because those are all unique to them. But when they turn around and talk to us and say, okay, now you need to add it into the tenant, into the intra, and how you're going to do that in Microsoft 365 and how you're going to do, all of those things, those processes have all been examined, right? That system doesn't exist yet, but it could. Yeah. And that's when you're going to start seeing a much broader adoption, I think, of organizations using MSPs, because MSPs are going to bring a lot more to the table to help provide value and reduced costs to the client. And the assessment, right?
Yeah.
Now, we're already providing a huge savings for them in time. Like we just had a meeting, like I had 2 meetings with 2 different clients today. And we talked about, as we're going through our implementation phases for our clients, because we break down the chunks of the assessment for our clients into smaller bite-sized bits. But we're going through some of the more complicated procedures that we work with them on about here's what things that you sort of need to define about how you're doing it, and here's the stuff we're doing, and we're going through the documentation with them about doing that. And they're just like, oh, thank God that you guys are here to help us, guide us through those pieces, because it is so freaking hard, right? But if you have now an assessed process that now we can even provide better, clear guidance to the client, and they get METs on those. I mean, we're bringing to the table, like, I'd say 70 to 80% of the controls are falling under our guys. And if we're able to walk in the door, and if we properly implement for the clients following how we get, like 70 to 80% of their stuff is immediately met because of the fact that they had us build all the container and bring all the infrastructure and do all that stuff for them. Like, man, you've just made that organization's life a million times better, a lot easier, more consistent. The audits go faster. The audits go cheaper. Everybody wins. Yeah. We're not there yet.
Right.
But I think that's the next logical step.
Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is, wait a second, you talked about this, the 70, percent of the controls or whatnot, that is not everything. You're telling me that we can't inherit an entire company of CMMC from you? Are you saying that if I don't buy your services, that I can't just pass my assessment without having to even do anything?
All right.
No.
So,
because why? Because why, Bobby?
Well, because first off, it's not really possible. Like when you look at the terminology, like they use identify, like, so alphas, like authorized users, are identified. Processes acting on behalf of a user are identified. Devices and authorized to connect to the system are identified. When you see the words identify, what that means is someone's got to say it's okay. And the only people that are authorized to do that is the client.
Yeah.
They're the
MSP can't do that for you.
No, because I don't own your company.
How do they do that? Yeah, they don't own the company for you.
And so, like, we were at MSP, or we were at Seek West, and I was on a panel with Kevin Mann, Fernando Machada, and Corinne Wise, and a gentleman came up
and Stuart Ikens.
And Stuart, right? Stuart was kind enough to panel it.
Yeah.
I love that dude. I can listen to him talk forever. He's like Morgan Freeman of, like, his voice is just so awesome. So, but like this guy came up and almost kind of heckled us from the fact he's like, I can do like over 90% of it. I don't know why you guys say we can't. And like Corinne sort of like judo ninja CMMC'd him at the end. He agreed with her and didn't even realize it until after he already said yes and said, wait a minute, I guess it is 80%. Like it, yeah. I think he left like upset, but like you just can't do that. And any reasonable C3PO is going to look at that and say no, but I've talked with C3POs where there are certain organizations that have incorrectly sold their services, and they now have told their clients they're ready, and they're out shopping. Get this, they're out shopping for C3POs that will assess them on 4 controls, because the rest have been appropriately inherited from this organization. And C3POs are like, that's not how that works. You can't just say, right, yeah, because that other organization's got level 2, so you only need to assess us on 4 controls and that's it. And they're like, no, that's not how it works. And like the cyber AB kind of had to say, that's not how that works. Knock that crap off. Yeah. You actually have to get assessed on all of it. But this is kind of the shenanigans sometimes that have been going out there, because there's some snake oil out there, sadly, that's being sold.
It goes with, I mean, in the title, a shared responsibility matrix, or, you know, they're calling it now a customer responsibility matrix, a CRM. There is shared responsibility that can happen. You know, it is possible. It is possible to give parts of the controls, you know, to a ESP. And there's a lot of things actually that the ESP can do. There's a lot that they can do if they're a good ESP, which is awesome because it's very helpful for the client. But it is still your organization and, you know, fully your responsibility to take charge of, even though they're doing some of the assessment objectives or whatnot. You really, it's like, how much are you fully 100% inheriting at the end of the day? Because you still need to know all those things. You still need to understand what the evidence is behind them. Like, you know what I mean? Like, although they are doing it physically, like, you can't just, you are not. And if you do this, you have a horrible MSP. You cannot sign on a dotted line, hand them the paper, and say, get me CMMC ready, and then never talk to that MSP again.
Right.
If that is happening, it is so wrong, and you are getting screwed over, because there's multiple things you have to make decisions on. There's multiple things you have to have your hand in. I keep bringing up change control process all the time because it's like, I'm like, how in the world could you not be a part of something like that? Like, your leadership has to know about these things, has to be in charge of them, has to, like, there's so many things that you have to do. This isn't, you are not giving the full responsibility of CMMC over to another organization. You can't do that.
I don't get to authorize whether or not you can install a CNC machine in your manufacturing environment.
No.
Like, I don't get the right to say whether you can or can't. The client gets to say. Now, I can tell you I might reject doing it if you're like, I need you to install it tomorrow. I'm like, I'm going to break so many controls for you. And when you get reassessed, if this gets looked at, you would fail your audit. Yeah. Like, so I can't help you shoot yourself in the head, but I can help get that CNC machine set up and done through a change process that we've already authorized, right? Because we can't help you break your policies, but we can help you implement them. So the policies of your change management has all these things they've got to go through, and we'll walk through it with you. Yeah. But they ultimately have to prove it, not me. Yeah. And so those are the things like what you're talking about, Kaleigh, like are absolutely fundamental. Yes. That have to happen. And then if you're going to go pick an organization, not only do you have to understand whose responsibility is what, you need to know how they're going to help you in your assessment. So you've got to understand, okay, are they responsible for adding users? Yes. Are they responsible for helping me work with adding the documentation for the first 3 that I'm responsible for? Right? Does the MSP say, I do Delta, Echo, and Foxtrot, the last 3. It's up to you to do Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie, and you have to have the policies and the documentation to back that up. I'm going to bring my stuff. It's up to you to bring yours. And there are plenty of C3POs and MSPs that understand that. There are MSPs that when they go to sell a client, they're going to be like, that's what I do. I bring METs, but I don't help you with the documentation piece. I don't help you write your SSP. I don't help you with the audit. But they still are able to do, Delta, Echo, and Foxtrot. They're able to do those. But those 2 creatures are not the same. So if you're engaging with an MSP, you need to understand like where there's line of division and what they're bringing to the table, because they're not all equal. And I know we're not. And sometimes in the sales process, it's very difficult for us to communicate to the client. Like we do all of that, but there's some that aren't. But then they'll go with the other people and then they come back to us going, they didn't help us enough. You guys are going to help us. Can you please do all this? And you're like, yes, we can do that. But I guess we didn't do a good job in our sales process of explaining that, but we're thankful to have you back.
Yeah, we're thankful to have you back. But we will have to go through our process again with you.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. There are some really great people out in this community that can help you get through your CMMC journey. And we highly recommend, finding somebody, if you are SMB, if you're a small business, if you don't have the resources internally to take care of this yourself, it is a big undertaking. We highly recommend you looking out there resources, for people that can help you. Now, just know where to look and know the questions to ask so that you do not put yourself in a very bad hole, in a very low hole, that you then have to dig out of, or somebody else, another MSP has to come and dig you, out of it or throw you a rope, and they're going to cost more money to do that and then start helping you on the journey itself. So just be very careful. There are resources that we'll put in the description below. Like an example is the MSP Collective does have a website that has some CMMC Level 2 certified MSPs on the website that you can view. They have already called and validated these people, their C3PAO and whatnot. Not all of the MSPs do the exact same thing.
Right. Yeah.
We'll have to
I think there's like 17 on that list. Not all of them do full help desk support. So they might only do like your SIM stuff or your SOC stuff.
Yeah. So just look at what you're looking
for. Just because they're on the list doesn't mean that they're going to do everything from moving you from zero of nothing to a full 110 and also do your help desk and all that stuff. We do that, but not everybody does. So, when you go and look at that list, just know that you're not sure where everybody falls in that mix. So it just depends on what you're looking for.
Yes. And then also the second resource that I recommend do not go to is LinkedIn. Okay. So I know we're on LinkedIn and we post a lot of stuff on there, and I hope that it is helpful to you. And I think, that we do the best we can with guiding and giving our opinions and giving our direction on things, but please do not go to those resources for guaranteed understanding of CMMC. Please make sure to understand what the Cyber AB requires. You can go to town halls. You can look at them on the website for free. They're just up there. Check it out. 32 CFR. It's up there. You can just look at it. It's on the NIST website. You know what I mean? And all of these resources are things that you should look at and understand yourself before just looking at a LinkedIn post or the comments section and thinking that that is enough to make a decision. This is a very important decision. It can give you a lot of risk as an organization seeking assessment. So please make that decision wisely. If you have any questions or thoughts or concerns or anything like that, and you want to let us know, you can put it in the comments below, and we'll reach back out to you as well, and we'll respond to all of those that you guys send. Also, if you want to see a specific video too, please make sure to send that in about a specific topic. We don't claim CMMC Jesus on here, but we love to talk about stuff, so we'll do that if you want us to. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Again, there's a lot of talk about this now going on right now, because as you can see, what it said in the cap was not 100% clear. So there is a lot of discussion still going around that. But we hope you enjoyed today's episode and tune in next Thursday for another one. But until then, guys, keep on climbing. See ya. Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.